Are we online? Okay. Now I'm on. All right, guys. Tonight we're going to talk and we're going to rehash a little bit of what we talked about last week, but tonight we're going to talk more and more about Roger Williams. Does anyone remember what we talked about last week with Roger Williams? Does anyone remember what we talked about with the New World last week? Huh? I know it's Sunday night, we're tired, but it's okay, we'll get through this. Last week, we talked about the whys behind why the move to the New World. Why did the Puritans feel the need to move over to the New World and how that came about? Because we remember last week, what are the people in England facing? What are the separatists and the Puritans facing in England? Persecution. Why? Because they would not conform to the Anglican Church. Now the Puritans still thought, some of them still thought that they could reform from within because they thought that the church in England had not gone far enough when it came to the Reformation. In their view, and from what we see with our early Baptist heritage, the Anglican Church really did not have much difference to the Roman Catholic Church. A lot of the same issues that the Anglican Church, that the Roman Catholic Church had, the separatists and the Puritans saw with the Anglican Church. Specifically when it came to the separatists, the collusion between church and state. They saw more and more of an issue and more of a reason why there needed to be a separation between the church and the state. Because when those two colluded, corruption and persecution followed. So, the Puritans left England. Some of them left England to the New World in search for, now we got to get this clear here, not complete religious freedom, but freedom to worship as they saw fit. We need to understand that. The Puritans did not believe in religious freedom for everybody. They believed in religious freedom for themselves. So when they left England, they went over to the New World and started what we know as the city on a hill. And we see a lot of their eschatology, their end times beliefs playing out when they went to the New World, because a lot of them were what we call post-millennials. They believed that Jesus was not going to come back unless they had a perfect Christian world waiting for him. So, the Puritans were trying to build this new Zion in Plymouth, and they were trying to build up the Christian faith here on earth. But the collusion between the local church, the local government, and the church was still there. And so the church and state colluded. And the problem is, as we saw in England, when the Puritans colluded with the state, yes, there was more religious tolerance for the Puritans, and yes, the church went to a more theologically grounded church, but it was very heavy-handed. And that's what the New World, the Puritans in the New World, that's what they saw there as well. And that's really where Roger Williams comes in. Roger Williams, born 1603 in London. Exact date not really known, but we know it was around 1603. His father was a merchant tailor, and his mother was a woman by the name of Alice. At an early age, Roger experienced a true spiritual conversion. Now, why is that such a big deal? In this time, in this Anglican church, as we saw a lot in the Roman Catholic Church, first off, were there a lot of true conversions, true people coming out and making actual conversions? Or was it more church is just what we do? Was it a routine, or was it actual true conversions? More times than not, when you're dealing with the kind of Anglican church or the Roman Catholic church, it was more routine than it was actual spiritual conversions. And so Roger Williams was a little bit of an enigma in his family, which caused a rift between himself and his father. His conversion was not looked upon proudly by his own father. His father looked at his conversion as an anathema. He did not like what happened to his son Roger. And so it created this rift between Roger and his father. So Roger grew up as a Christian man who grew into a Christian man, but grew under a lot of strife because his father was not approving of what he actually believed. But while as a teenager, he studied under a man by the name of Edward Coke, who was actually a famous jurist, someone who was well educated, and someone who trained Roger Williams up in education, and he became very well-to-do and very educated man. Roger Williams went on to Cambridge, probably one of the best universities still on this planet, where he learned many different languages, the biblical languages being a few: Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek. Roger became fluent in all of those, as well as Latin and French and Dutch. So we have Roger Williams, who is, frankly, let's just say it, he's a genius. It would take that kind of genius to be able to memorize that many languages. Guys, I've had to learn Hebrew and Greek along with English. Let me tell you something. It ain't no walk in the park. So usually there's a good mindset that a lot of guys going into seminary, we figured out real quickly when it concerns to Greek and Hebrew. Usually if you were good at one, you weren't very good at the other. It was very rare that we saw somebody who could be good at both biblical languages together. Usually if you excelled in one, you struggled in the other. That's usually how it played out. But Roger Williams excelled in these languages, excelled in school, excelled in his studies. But here's the thing. It was also in Cambridge where he became familiar with a lot of the Puritans and a lot of their beliefs. And as he studied more and more into the Puritan way of thinking, he became more and more convinced of the corruption within the Church of England. Became more and more convinced of the problems within the Anglican Church. So while he did take orders from the Church of England at first, when he finally became a Puritan at Cambridge, that connection was split and severed permanently. So while at Cambridge, Roger Williams becomes convinced that the Church of England is corrupt and splits off from them forever. Okay? So later on, he actually became a Puritan chaplain, and then he married Mary. Okay, I know that sounds weird. He married Mary. But he married Mary, and then they actually had 6 children. Right now I'm with 1 children. I can't imagine having 6. I can barely deal with 1 right now. But during this time, while he was raising his family, while this was going on, he had heard about Puritans leaving England for the New World. He had seen what was going on, foreseen the oncoming waves of persecution, and he saw the Puritans leaving for the New World. Now we need to understand something. He did not leave, like we said last week, he did not leave at the first wave. The first wave of Puritans that left for the New World, the Mayflower, all of those guys, they left to go establish this colony in where? Where was the first colony? Plymouth. The first people leave on the Mayflower, head over, get to Plymouth. They establish the Mayflower Compact, which was a Puritan document, and they established the first colonial government in the New World at Plymouth. So, first waves go along, but then persecution starts to kick up. And more Puritans start to see that there's going to come a point where they're no longer allowed to leave. There's going to come a point where they're no longer allowed to leave. That really hits with Charles I. But before that happens, Roger Williams foresees what is coming and goes, we've got to go too. And so Roger Williams takes himself and his family and makes the journey over to the New World. Now think about that for a second, okay? Because we talked about what these journeys looked like, that they were harsh journeys. I mean, you're not talking about some cruise ship here. This is a wooden boat going through the sea where you got to worry about starvation, you have to worry about disease, you have to worry about storms, and you're rats, and you got to worry about the fact that you've got 6 kids. So you got 6 kids coming on this boat with you to the New World where you don't really know what you're going to find. You've heard rumors, but really, they don't have internet like we do today. It's not like they can go on Google and search pictures of, oh, what does that Plymouth colony look like today? Yeah, looks pretty good. Let's go. They really did not know what they were going to find when they got there. So Roger Williams, in pursuit of religious freedom from the government persecuting him, goes over to the New World. But, unfortunately, when he got there, religious freedom is not what he found. Williams, during his time in England, became convinced, like we've talked about, of the corruption within the Anglican Church, did not see it as redeemable, and that's where he started really formulating his beliefs on the separation between church and state, which we'll talk about more and more as we go through this. But when he gets over to the New World, what does he find? He finds the Puritans, whose churches are colluding with the local government. So they arrive at the colonies, and the signs of the first split really arise right off the get-go. They arrive in Boston in 1631, and that church there actually invited him to become the teaching minister. And the reason this happened was because their actual teaching minister had gone off on a trip, and they were kind of short-handed. So they needed somebody. They've heard of Roger Williams. Seems like a great preacher. Let's have him. Well, Williams declined the position because it was not a separated church. Because the civil magistrates had been going around and punishing people when they weren't following all of the 10 Commandments. So, let's think about this for a second. They established the 10 Commandments as law in the colonies. And magistrates would go around and punish those who were not following it perfectly. Okay? Roger Williams goes around and goes, you kidding me? This is religious freedom? And so, Roger Williams says, no. Because you guys, the state, you guys are preaching this, and then you're having the state go around and put people in jail for not following what your sermons are teaching. So, let's take this to today. I preach something on Sunday morning. Okay? Then I find out that one of you doesn't follow it. So I call the police, and I tell them to go to your house and have you arrested because you didn't follow what I preached on Sunday. Welcome to the Puritan colonies. Okay? This is why Roger Williams does not like what he finds when he gets there. And so he became more and more, instead of Puritan, separatist. And more he becomes convinced of the need for the separation between church and state. Roger did not believe that the local Puritan government should be enforcing Puritan standards when religious freedom is what they're going for. He believed in the true freedom of religion, and the colonial government could not tolerate the dissent of Williams. And so what do? They hold a trial about Roger Williams. And it's almost this comical event, because they hold this trial for Roger Williams, and you need to understand something. This is around the same time as the Salem witch trials. Okay? These trials were not very favorable to actually having good, just decisions. So, when this show trial basically comes up, Roger Williams decides, I'm not going. And so he doesn't go. They try him and convict him on sedition and heresy, and then go look for Roger Williams to tell him, you've been convicted of sedition and heresy. When they finally find him, they go, you're banished. To which Roger Williams goes, okay, fine, I'm banished. Bye. And so Roger Williams was banished from the colony. But he wasn't the only one who left. He took his family and a bunch of followers along with him. And they went and established a new colony in Rhode Island. Anyone know what that colony was called? Don't look at your notes. Already did, I know. Okay, it's Providence. Providence, Rhode Island, that we know today, was started by Roger Williams. Providence, Rhode Island exists today because Roger Williams was banished. So Roger Williams gets banished. He and his followers leave and begin a new settlement within Rhode Island. This new settlement was named Providence, and it was here that the first establishment of true freedom of religion became the law of the land. Before this, in the New World, this did not exist. Okay? Even in Amsterdam, where we saw the first Baptists start to come and form their own church, there wasn't even this kind of level of religious freedom. Roger Williams' law of the land was anyone who came to Providence had the freedom to worship based on his or her own conscience of any religion. So this was true freedom of religion for the first time. Also, it was the first real democratic government where people actually voted. See where I'm getting at here? Our government, what we have today, really began in Providence. Okay? Thomas Jefferson later cites Roger Williams and cites what he did when he gives his explanation for the Constitution. It's Roger Williams who really helped shape not just the Baptist church, but our own country. So he establishes Providence and maintained throughout his time there that people had the right to be able to believe as their conscience stated. And that citizenship was not dependent on personal belief. You did not have to follow like Roger Williams did to be able to be considered a citizen. So we have true religious freedom finally sprout up here in this first colony. But what's interesting about this religious freedom is it breeded this tolerance that was unheard of. And we see this a lot in their relationship with the Native American tribes around the area. Because the Puritans did not have great relationships with the Native American tribes. Roger Williams and his colony did. And Roger Williams went out of his way to develop a great relationship with the Native American tribes. Now, when the Massachusetts Bay colonies, the Pequot War started out with some of the Native American tribes, specifically the Pequots. They called on Roger Williams for help, and Roger Williams, out of necessity, went and helped the other colonies defend themselves against this one Native American tribe. But in the process, develops this great relationship with the, and I can never pronounce this name correctly, so bear with me, Narragansetts. Probably just butchered that, but the Narragansetts, as well as other Native American tribes. Developed good relationships with them, talked with them, spoke with them. So when the colonists defeated the Pequots and actually had all these other Native American tribes, they relied on Roger Williams to go and negotiate with these other tribes, to go and speak with them. And the tribes, interestingly enough, regarded Roger Williams as the most trustworthy. They would go, if they wanted to go negotiate, they'd go to Williams because they regarded him as somebody they could trust. So we also see here the integrity of Roger Williams, because he was a man who would go out and negotiate with anybody. He was not just someone who spoke about religious freedom and spoke about freedom to people, but he believed it and acted it out. So, it's this right here, because of him and his negotiating, that peace was actually kept in the region for almost 40 years. All because of Roger Williams and his influence. Unfortunately, though, as it says here, the new colonists in the region saw Roger Williams and his negotiating with the Native Americans as an affront. They saw what Roger Williams was doing as completely, totally wrong. And they began to see Williams as a traitor and an enemy. And so some of these colonists started getting plans together to go over and attack Roger Williams and his people. And so they were gearing up for this, gearing up for this, gearing up for this. And then Roger Williams comes up with a good idea. What chance do we have? Because we're not really, Providence still wasn't recognized by England as a legitimate colony. So what are we going to do? We're going to go get some legitimacy. So, and this is where Roger Williams actually makes a traveling arrangements and actually goes back to England. So they begin to see Roger Williams as this traitor, this enemy. Williams foresees this, sees what's about to happen, and so what does he do? He goes back to England. He goes back to England so that he could secure a legal charter for his settlement. But what does he find when he gets back to England? Around the same time is the English Civil War. Now, do we remember what we talked about with the English Civil War between the Loyalists and who? The Puritans. Roger goes over and he starts having problems because who's in control at this point of the English Civil War? The Puritans. So, here we go. This is what makes it real interesting right here. He goes back over to England, where the Puritans are now in control over England. Okay? Where Oliver Cromwell is now in power in England. And he just got kicked out of a Puritan colony in the New World. And he's trying to establish a new colony that's not Puritan in the New World. And he has to go back to England to get a legal charter from the people who are planning to attack him in the New World. We following this for a second? Do we see the struggle that he's going to end up in over in England? But here's where we really see the providence of God right here. Because Roger does go over to England to go get this charter and finds his way into the offices of Sir Henry Vane the Younger. And even though there was strong opposition from agents who had also made their way back to England from Massachusetts, what happens? Roger Williams gets his charter. So let's think about this for a second and see how God works here. Roger Williams went over to the New World, got kicked out of the Puritan colony because the Puritans did not like the fact that Roger Williams was not too happy with their local government's collusion with their Puritan church. So he gets kicked out. He starts to negotiate with the Native Americans, giving them peace, but the people in the Massachusetts colonies don't like that, so they start making moves to go attack Roger. Roger goes back to England, where the people, the group that was going to attack him, they send agents along to their people in England to stop Roger, and Roger Williams still gets the charter, still gets the legitimacy he needs to go back to the New World and basically get some legitimacy so that it puts a further block against these other colonists from coming over and attacking his colony. Do we see how God works here? Even with all of those roadblocks, even with all of those supposed things that should have stopped Roger Williams, he still got that charter. And even more so, while Roger Williams was in England, he went and started talking to the English about what he had learned from the Native Americans, because up to this point, all they had heard about was from the Puritans, who were not on good terms with the Native American tribes around those areas, didn't like them. And so here comes Roger Williams, who actually develops and shows them a little bit about the Native American language and what things actually mean. He starts to educate the people in England about the Native Americans. And so he actually builds up and writes this book that becomes very popular in England. It's called The Key into the Languages of America, 1643, where he actually goes through, and it almost became a dictionary of the Indian language into English. And so this book, this writing, went throughout England. And so these people were learning more and more about the Native Americans through Roger Williams' experience. And so he became more and more of a well-known author and started building his reputation around England, which is why his next writing became such a problem. Because then he writes probably his most famous work, The Bloody Tenet of Persecution for Cause of Conscience. This book right here is something that caused a major, major uproar in England. Not just with the Puritans, but with everybody. Why? Because this was his manifesto. This was his book. His book for showing why church and state should not be colluding at all. And where he argued for a wall of separation between the church and the state. And the reason he wrote that is because when the church and state colludes, persecution always follows. And we've seen that. As we've talked about church history over the past couple months, we've seen that every single time the church and the state collude with each other, what has always followed? Persecution. Persecution. Whenever whenever the state makes a state religion, persecution always follows. And what Roger Williams argued is that biblically, even if they are a different religion than our own. Biblically, we are not to take up government force against anyone based on religion. There is a separation between church and state that needs to be maintained, because whenever that wall crumbles, whenever it starts to crumble, persecution always follows every single time. And if there's one thing that Roger Williams argued for, it's that Christians should never be known as persecutors. We are not to be known as those who go out and persecute. We are the persecuted, not the persecutors. And so Roger Williams saw this church-state collusion as an affront to the Bible. And so he argued for this wall of separation, and this enraged Parliament. But by the time Roger Williams writes this and sends it out, the Parliament was a little bit late to the party, finds that Roger Williams is already on a boat heading back to the New World. So once again, Roger Williams, a little bit too fast for him. So Roger Williams goes back and on his return to Rhode Island. And this marked a time of both struggle and freedom, where he actually did struggle a lot with the different groups that were in Providence, because at this point there were more than just the Puritans and the Baptists and everybody else. There were Quakers and there were other groups within Providence, and they all came with their own beliefs. And really, Williams for a while struggled, because people were wanting to still put what they thought into law, and he would struggle with them because he's still advocating for religious freedom. This really, the biggest struggle that played out is one we'll see play out again in Southern Baptist history, and that's the one over slavery. Roger Williams, First Baptist, was strongly against slavery, and actually wrote into law in Providence against the practice of slavery. He did not want it anywhere near his colony. Nowhere near his colony. Unfortunately, when the colonies started to merge back together in the area, they ignored Roger Williams' writings completely. And eventually slavery took hold in the area of Rhode Island. But Roger Williams, in really Baptist history, even though we'll talk about a little bit more of the Southern Baptists and where they come into play in this whole idea of slavery and all of this, really, when Baptists first started, we are and still should be anti-slavery. But throughout all this, Roger Williams is credited with the First Baptist Church. Why? Because if we go back and rewind a little bit, before even Roger Williams left England the first time, he started to get to know the theology of not just the other separatists, but specifically the writings of Smith, Smythe, Helwys, all those guys. He started reading them, and he became more and more convinced of credo baptism. Baptism, believers' baptism. And once he got over to the New World, he became so convinced that he himself was rebaptized. And that, in Providence, Rhode Island, started the First Baptist Church, which actually still exists today. The First Baptist Church in Providence still exists. You can go to Providence and you can see it. The First Baptist Church of Providence, Rhode Island, where Roger Williams built up that church. The First Baptist Church, and don't let anyone tell you any different. But Roger Williams brought over, and through all of this struggle, all of these things that came up against him, really planted the foothold, really planted his feet here in the New World. And really, without Roger Williams, not only would we not have a Baptist church, we probably would not have the United States as we know it today. Religious freedom, the idea of the separation between church and state, came about because Roger Williams brought it over here. And Roger Williams said, no, we cannot accept this way of the state colluding with the church, because every single time it has happened in church history, we've done something that is unbiblical. And so he saw the importance of it and put it into law in Providence. And the founders of our country looked at what was going on in Providence and made it a model for our country today. But more so than that, we've made it into Baptist life here today. We are what? We are Congregationalists. We don't believe that a denomination has the right to tell local congregations what to believe. We don't believe that the state has any right to tell local congregations what to believe. We believe in religious freedom and the right to worship as our conscience sees fit, and ultimately how we see the Bible fitting into our lives. What's our final authority? The Bible. Is it the state? No. Is it the denomination? No. And where we got these ideas from really go back to, in our country at least, go right back to Roger Williams. Without Roger Williams, we would not have this church here today. Vine Street would not exist without the work of Roger Williams, without God doing a mighty thing through Roger Williams. So thank the Lord for men like Roger Williams, who came over and faced so much adversity, but still maintained his beliefs and stood on them even through that adversity. And look at the legacy that he left behind. We sit here in pews in a Baptist church today because of men like Roger Williams. So, let's pray. Father God, we thank you that you left men behind who left such a legacy for us. And we pray that we could be men, not just like them, but be men and women like your son, Jesus. Because we know that that's what these men that we looked at today are, that's what they aspire to be. We thank you for them, and we thank you for what you have done through them and through us. In your name, amen.